his, a text of his today from us. For the 6th through 12th grade teachers, K through 5, we got you a different text that's more suitable for your needs. We want to make sure that we address that. A couple of other quick announcements. One thing that I want to highlight, this is aimed at high school teachers that are here today. Our office is running a program called GCI, or Global Citizenship Initiative, and I just want to tell you that we're looking for schools right now that might want to pilot or run that next year. We got 21 schools piloting it now. Real quick, there's going to be a table at lunch. Angel Campbell, raising her hand in the back. She'll be at lunch. Her and John Smith, our service learning coordinator. So if you want more information about it, please go talk to them today at lunch. Basically 3 parts of it. We're going to have a semester. We do have a semester-long civics course, a semester-long personal finance course aimed at seniors. But if the school decides to do a different grade level, that's fine. There's training and PD and all that stuff around that. There's a student leadership component. So this is like 9 through 12, working with schools to help get a group of students really trained on leadership qualities, etc. Meet with the principal, work on an issue within your school. And then development of service learning, pedagogies and whatnot, and integrating them into your social science and other curriculums. So those are the 3 main parts, and then what we're trying to do is we're working with the Forming Foundation, and the ideal is that these schools will eventually become democracy schools, which is a state identified recognition for you. So again, if you're interested in that, please see Angel or John at lunch today. Another one, you can get more information from Colonial Williamsburg if you want to at some point today. And I didn't read up enough on this, but I know that they're offering scholarships for about a week-long stay down in Colonial Williamsburg in Virginia this summer. This is very much an educational thing and helping you be able to figure out how to incorporate some of that curriculum into your work. So if you're interested in that, make sure you see our representatives from Colonial Williamsburg or talk to Monica today. A couple other quick things. 3.0 framework is up, it's live. As you know, it was before. We are currently doing updates, so all those units again that you see on the website now will have resources aligned to that within the next couple of months. And last thing, we will be doing a social science expo this summer. We'll get you a date, a hard date, at some point in the next probably 3 weeks, and that will be something where we'll have a bunch of partners there. We'll have some keynote speakers and stuff like that. So we'll make sure you're invited. All right, Monica.
Good morning. I'm going to be really, really brief, partly because we want to start on time with everything on our schedule. So with that said, though, I just wanted to share with you, please make it to your breakout sessions promptly. We have received some notice that some of the breakout sessions can't start on time, or there's some laggers. So let's make sure we're good students. We model the behaviors we do in our classroom, and we attend our breakout sessions promptly. So we're going to make sure we're a little cognizant about going through the schedule. Quick thing, since I have like 30 seconds or so, I want to alert you to a few things. The first thing is the evaluation. We made a little change this time with the evaluation system, so could you pull it out? Because what we are asking you to do is we would like you to evaluate not only the session as a whole, but also your breakout sessions. We want to get some idea at this point, how are things in your breakout sessions? So we want to get some feedback on that. So you want to fill that evaluation form out throughout the day. The other thing that I want to share with you would be the sub-coverage form. All of you have a copy of this form in your folder. It is your responsibility to make sure you give it to your sub-clerk or the person who handles that, so that you can get your sub covered, so we can pay for that sub, okay? We're noticing that some of the sub clerks are getting them a little late. There is a deadline. It's really important. It's March 6th. We need that form in our office because, come on, let's just be real. When the subs do not get paid, when they expect to get paid, they get a little upset, and I would too. Okay, we're working with people's money, so let's make sure we get these sub forms in by March 6th. We got a little lead time. And the last thing I want to share, and then we're going to turn it over to Les Lynn for the introduction. You see a little sign-up sheet in the center of your table. Some of you have expressed in your eval that you would love to stay connected with the various partners, even some of the partners that you are not in a breakout session. And as a result, what we would like to do is, if you are interested in being on a special listserv, that will go out to our various partners who are presenting. Fill out your contact information on the form that's at the center of your table, and we will compile that and we will give that to all the partners. So you will get notices of their PDs and special offerings for the partners who are involved. You do not have to fill out the form if you don't want to get all that information, but we definitely want to open that to people who might want information from the various partners who are presenting. And I think that is it. Without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Mr. Lynn.
Thanks very much. I'm Les Lynn, founding director of the Chicago Debate League. We've been working in Chicago public schools for now 16 years, building competitive academic debate programs. We'd love to work with any of your schools. We're also, as Marty said, beginning to work with schools on curricular debate, which is incorporating argumentation methodology and debate formats into regular classroom instruction. That's our very exciting new vista. We want to work with as many teachers that want to work with that project as possible. This morning, we have a few alumni from the Chicago Debate League that will be talking with you very little bit about how their experience learning competitive debate to argue contextual evidence about public policy issues help prepare them for college. And our three panelists, alumni panelists, we actually have a fourth on his way, is stuck in traffic. He'll be here shortly, we hope. But our three that are here are Lucia Hernandez from Thomas Kelly High School, now a senior at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Christine Horst, a graduate of Lane Tech High School and recently at Northwestern University. And LaDonna Miller, a graduate of King College Prep and now a student at Augustana College. So I'll turn it over to Lucia.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Lucia. I graduated.
Yeah, why don't you come on up?
Can everyone hear me fine? Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm kind of loud, so it's fine. So my name is Lucia. I'm a senior at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, majoring in international studies with a certificate in Chicano Latino studies. I graduated in 2009 at Thomas Kelly High School. So go Trojans and go Badgers. And now I am, about to graduate in December, looking into law schools, and I got an interview for an internship at DLA Piper, so I'm really excited for that. And I debated in the Chicago Debate League for 3 years. I dedicated every summer to debate. I went to debate camp, and it was an amazing experience for me. And I think that without debate, I really do not believe I would have gone to college, even go away for college. And one of my favorite topics was how the United States federal government should substantially increase public health assistance to sub-Saharan Africa. And that was the first time where I actually learned about another country other than the United States. And it helped me now when I'm in my college courses, because I took a class in African International Relations, and it helped me not only examine how the United States federal government interacts with Africa, but I actually could contribute to the discussions. We were talking about the global gag rule, and none of my colleagues or none of my classmates knew what the global gag rule was. And I was the first one to raise my hand and explain what the global gag rule was. And there was no readings on it. There was no other readings or other knowledge besides the fact that I debated. And I debated about the global gag rule, and I researched a lot of the evidence of what the global gag rule was and how it impacted African countries and kind of like the US and their beliefs on the global gag rule. So I thought that was really helpful when there was discussions about it. Also, there was, in my gender women studies course, there was a topic on female genital mutilations. And I was able to also contribute to the discussions of female genital mutilation and how that was a violation of human rights, and kind of my stance on it. And not only was it that I could, contribute to the discussion, but I actually had prior knowledge, like evidence. I could, talk about it in depth about female genital mutilation instead of just saying it's so horrible for women, right? And also, I took a human rights class, a human rights course, and we also talked about the United Nations, and we talked about the different treaties and declarations on human rights, and we had a debate on it, and the professor emailed me and was like, wow, you're a natural at debating and looking at both sides of the issue. You weren't just arguing about your issues, and you also used the evidence to support your arguments, right? And this, for me, like coming into college, second year, I was so scared because it was out of my comfort zone. I grew up on the south side of Chicago where everyone looked like me. So to stand up in the class and argue my point, and to see that the professor, acknowledged that I was reading the evidence, I can make an argument, and I could actually think about what the other side is thinking about, and, crafting my arguments based on those. She was really impressed, and, I succeeded in that class, and I was really successful. And I really think that it was because of my debate experience that I was able to look at both sides of the issue and use the evidence in the arguments that I was making. So, yeah, that's all.
Good morning. I'm LaDonna Miller. I graduated from King College Prep in 2012, and now I'm at Augustana College. I'm a first year majoring in neuroscience pre-pharm, minoring in communications and sociology. Yes, debate has nothing, you may think that debate has nothing to do with my majors, but debate actually does. The research aspect of debate, I dedicated my summers to participating in different institutes around the country, and the Chicago Debate League made sure that we had access to that. But the research mechanisms can help even in my science curricular courses and within my human and social relations classes as well. My favorite topic in my favorite resolution would be that the United States federal government should substantially increase social services for those living in poverty. That really hit home with me because that year I had the opportunity to research what the actual poverty line was, my aspect of the poverty line, and different social services that I have access to within the federal government, and it helps me learn the different connections that I have. And in college, taking sociology classes, it helped me know different things of what the poverty line was, different access that individuals have. And it was clear to my professor where I was taken out of sociology, intro to sociology 100, and placed into a 200 level sociology class because of my knowledge of social relations and sociology from the Chicago Debate League. But another instance that knowing that argumentation truly helps was when it was time to place into my English courses at school. I was placed into a higher level 200 class in which it is required for English majors, and my major has nothing to do with English. But because of the argumentation in the paper writing that I learned from the Chicago Debate League, it also helped me advance. One more instance where the Chicago Debate League has helped me advance would be in the classroom debating and discussions. In my history class in fall term, I had the experience of debating, was President Woodrow Wilson egocentrical or not? Most evidence is persuaded that he really was self-fulfilling. But if you take the Chicago Debate League has shown me how you can take an argument and use it. And basically in the Chicago Debate League, we call it a turn. And we would say that, yes, it may have been self-fulfilling, but in the long run, it helps others. The Chicago Debate League has helped me with argumentation in high school and in college so far. So it would be something nice for you all to be interested in.
Sorry, one second. Hi, I'm Christine Horst. I went to Lane Tech and I debated for 3 years. I also coached Lane Tech for 5 years, so I've been involved in debate for over a decade now. And I graduated from Northwestern in 2011. So one of the ways that debate affects me is that it makes you think critically about not only the context of the text that you read, but also the text itself. You don't judge a piece of evidence based on its prose, but rather on the supporting evidence that it provides. And that forces you to engage in the text in a way that you wouldn't normally do so. You end up asking the text questions because you're critical of it, and it's very, it's very engaging when an author answers a question that you had proposed in your mind. Other than retention, it also helps you internalize the information that you're reading. So besides for making debaters better, like more globally aware about, like African policies and human rights violations, it also helps shape the types of things that you're concerned about. So for instance, my first year in debate, the topic was United Nations peacekeeping operations, and my affirmative was that the United States should intervene in Sudan in the Sudanese civil war because the Geneva Conventions mandated that it was a genocide that required an intervention. And most people from my generation don't conceive of genocide as something that can happen today, because when we think about it, when we learn about it, we learn about the Holocaust, and we don't know that like those types of things can happen now. And so one of the things we learned through reading the evidence and learning about the Sudanese civil war was that the definition of genocide is any type of state's violence against state-sponsored violence against an ethnic group. And we could look to specific places in the text that say, like, here's what the government of Khartoum is doing and how it's affecting people. So not only do I have the ability to understand something that's extremely complex and important for somebody my age to know about, but also be able to tell other people, like, I have specific reasons why I think that the Sudanese civil war could be considered a genocide, and here's why you should also care about it. And so the way that carries over into more, collegiate, the more collegiate level is that at Northwestern, one of my favorite classes in sociology was law and international threats. And I recently went back and read one of my final papers for the class, which was on how governments subvert international human rights law. And I was really surprised in reading the text at how clear my thesis was and how well I was able to grasp such abstract political theories and able to support those evidences that in a paper. So from these theoretical texts about international law, I was able to figure out specific examples of how countries can override certain international law, like vague law writing or lack of enforcement mechanisms. And I was able to take those and apply them and generate my own ideas that were specific to the topic of my paper, which was Guantanamo Bay and Abu Ghraib human rights violations. And my teacher was so impressed with my level of engagement in the class and my papers that he actually invited me to work with his graduate level class, even though I was an undergraduate at the time. So that's how debate has shaped the way that I engage with text and I engage with the evidence of what I'm reading, and how it helps me internalize it and be able to carry it with me. Thank you.
worked with our speaker, Dr. Gerald Graff, as an undergraduate at Northwestern and then as a graduate student at the University of Chicago. He's had a tremendous influence on my own thinking and the work that I've done. So he was invited here to speak. You've all seen his bio. He's a tremendously accomplished academic in the field of English and education. Early in his career being a very important literary theorist, working with the likes of Jacques Derrida and other leading theorists, Stanley Fish and others, and then moving into pedagogy and education. And most recently, he was the 2010 president of the Modern Language Association. We all know what that is, the ultimate governing organization over all English professors and language professors throughout the United States. And here to speak about ArgueSpeak and other forms of argumentation in education is Dr. Gerald Graff.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Am I audible back there? No? I think that my teachers at Senn High School, class of 55, I'd like to think they would be proud of me today. I never thought when I graduated from Senn and before that Graham Stewart in Chicago that I would be invited here, and I'm very grateful for it. And especially for this occasion to this very important project of trying to move from competitive debate as an important but non-curricular activity to infusing debate centrally into the Chicago Public School curriculum. I think that's could be huge. Yeah, my title is Parlez-vous, ArgueSpeak, and I'm really gratified that a couple of people have already used ArgueSpeak up here, Marty Moe and Les Lynn, as if it's actually a word, which is, I think, my goal is to make it an actual word. Excuse me. Our 10-year-old son, Aaron, asked us the other day to buy him a 9.910 model Nerf gun. If you ever seen one of those, they're pretty formidable. And we immediately refused, saying that the 3 Nerf guns he already had were enough. But Aaron reminded us that we'd promised the gun to him a couple of weeks earlier if he cleaned up his room, as he had. As usual, Aaron was right. Like most kids, Aaron is an excellent debater when his interests are at stake. And he's devilishly quick at pouncing on his parents' contradiction. It sometimes seems as if half of Aaron's sentences begin, "But you said." Not that Aaron's argumentative skills are very advanced. He seems only recently to have reached the developmental stage of realizing that other minds see the world differently from his, and that when he's asked why he likes something, "Because I like it," is not a helpful answer. But Aaron makes up in persistence for what he lacks in conceptual sophistication. There are few propositions that Aaron won't fiercely contest, whether it's that he should take a bath or that he's watching too much TV. But then, how could Aaron and other children not learn to argue at very early ages, seeing that making arguments is one of the few means they have of getting their needs met in a world where older and bigger people call most of the shots? And making arguments is a step up in effectiveness from throwing a tantrum. At least I hope so. For this reason, you might think Aaron's school would be tapping into his argumentative skills as a means of drawing Aaron into his academic tasks. But it isn't. It isn't doing that. Aaron's curriculum is focused mostly on learning information and concepts with little invitation to build on his argument skills or enter into debates. If anything, Aaron's curriculum is already teaching him that a penchant for arguing is something troublemakers have, and that he needs to check at the classroom door. I suspect that if we looked at high school students who are failing in school and who will soon drop out, we would find that many of those students who are apathetic in their classrooms are smart and articulate arguers in the schoolyard and the playground. In some cases, they may be smarter and more articulate than their classmates who are getting better grades. Yet these students too, these struggling students or failing students, have got the message that arguing and debating, things that they're good at, have nothing to do with doing well in school. Now, of course, educators could be forgiven if they worry that arguing and debating are dangerously close to fighting and bullying, things that many boys and some girls are already all too prone to do. This way of thinking is certainly understandable in the wake of the Columbine and Sandy Hook massacres and other similar shooting events and other forms of school violence. Even so, it seems that we educators are missing a great opportunity if we keep the curriculum free of argument and debate, including, for example, the opportunity to induce violent-prone students to channel their aggressive impulses from fighting with fists, guns, and slurs to fighting with words and ideas. Argument is one of the few academically relevant practices that students already have some experience with, and yet we educators have done little to exploit that fact, take advantage of it. For these reasons, the new Common Core standards seem very promising to me, since they present argument, very rightly in my view, as the most important skill for, quote, college and career readiness, central criterion in the Common Core. And they mandate that students should demonstrate argument skills at appropriate levels all the way from pre-K and kindergarten to the senior year in high school. Here's how the authors of the standards put it in Research Appendix A, entitled "The Special Place of Argument in the Standards." And let's see, where do I go? You're going to do this for me? Thank you. Yeah, I hope you can make out that print clearly. I'll read it. The standards put particular emphasis on students' ability to write sound arguments on substantive topics and issues, as this ability is critical to college and career readiness. English and education professor Gerald Graff writes that argument literacy is fundamental to being educated. The university is largely an argument culture, Graff contends. Therefore, K-12 schools should teach the conflicts, teach the debates, so that students are adept at understanding and engaging in argument, both oral and written, when they enter college. He claims that because argument is not standard in most school curricula, only 20% of those who enter college are prepared in this respect. When teachers ask students to consider two or more perspectives on a topic or issue, something far beyond surface knowledge is required. Students must think critically and deeply, assess the validity of their own thinking, and anticipate counterclaims in opposition to their own thinking. I strongly agree with Gerald Graff's position on this. Furthermore, the standards highlight a particular kind of argument, which is suggested in that last part of the statement there about engaging with counterclaims, a kind of argument in which students don't make claims in isolation, as in the standard 5-paragraph theme type of argument, but rather make their claims in debate with others, whether those are the authors of an assigned text or their classmates and teachers. The standards encourage the kind of argument, in short, that Kathy Birkenstein and I, who will be here later today, breakout, Kathy Birkenstein and I, in the title of our writing textbook, called "They Say, I Say" argument, a kind in which students are concerned as much with listening to what they say as they are with expressing their own arguments, or a kind of argument in which summarizing what others say or have said or might say is necessary for forming their own arguments. Lucia Hernandez mentioned how important it was her to learn to take into account both sides of the argument, not just figure out what you think in isolation. Can we see figure the next slide. This is just from the Common Core Standards, grades 11 to 12. Students should be able to write by essentially senior year, senior year of secondary school. Students should write arguments to support claims in an analysis of substantive topics or text using valid reasoning and relevant and sufficient evidence. And then I've highlighted the important moment of engaging with opposing perspectives or alternate perspectives. Introduce precise, knowledgeable claims, establish the significance of the claims, distinguish the claim from alternate or opposing claims, and create an organization that logically sequences claims, counterclaims, reasons, and evidence. Develop claims and claims and counterclaims fairly and thoroughly, supplying the most relevant evidence for each, while pointing out the strengths and limitations of both your own and others' claims and assumptions in a manner that anticipates the audience's knowledge level, concerns, values, and possible biases. We can have the next, please. These are a couple of illustrations from They Say, I Say, from the introduction to the book. And we compare two essentially forms of argument. This we call sort of the 5-paragraph theme model of argument, or the research paper where the student is encouraged to make an argument and cite sources, but not really to engage with those sources, not to agree or disagree with them, rather to use them as a kind of backup for an already formed claim. We imagine a speaker addressing an audience. The characters in The Sopranos are very complex. It's an argument, but it isn't it's not clear whom it's with or what it's with, right? And we imagine not very good response. Why is he telling me this? You know? Reaction that I hope I'm not eliciting right now from you guys. Can we see figure 2? Virtually the same claim that's being made by the speaker here in figure 2. The characters in the series are very complex. But notice what happens to the same claim as we see it when it's framed as a response to something they say. We think the same claim, we hope you agree, undergoes a kind of sea change. It's transformed. It suddenly makes sense. It suddenly has a point. Some say that The Sopranos presents caricatures of Italian Americans. In fact, however, the characters in the series are very complex. We imagine a better response. The way we sum up the point here, our own point, is that unless you can write into your text the counter view to your own, something that they say or that others out there are thinking, your own argument might be clear, but why you need to make it, why you think you need to make it, won't be. That is, your point won't be clear. And it's kind of important that students be moved, we think, from figure 1 to figure 2 argument, which is really the kind of argument that operates in the real world, where people are make arguments in the first place only because they need to add to or supplement or contest what others are saying. So to sum up then, I've made 2 points so far, and both, I hope, persuasive reasons for curricular debate, the infusion of argument and debate into the regular school curriculum, so that debate doesn't remain an extracurricular activity for students who may join the competitive debate team, but also becomes an activity that students engage in every academic subject. First point, schools then need to start tapping into the native argument skills that students bring with them from home, the playground, and the schoolyard. And schools need to show students how to transfer those argument skills into their academic work and make themselves more college and career ready. Second point, the Common Core Standards now not only mandate that schools do just that, make arguments central across academic subjects, but they give us a picture of what students, we hope, will be able to do if we can successfully highlight and teach argument. But of course, we wouldn't be here today if it were all that easy to tap into students' latent argument and debate skills and channel those skills into academic work. The Common Core standards expressly leave it to teachers and schools to figure out how to do that, how to infuse argument and debate into the curriculum, or to use a term Les and I have started to use along with ArgueSpeak, how to debatify your courses and your units. And here it seems to me there are at least 3 formidable obstacles that we need to address and overcome if we're going to move from competitive debate to more broad, more pervasive curriculum debate. We're going to do that successfully. So there's 3 obstacles, and the remainder of my talk addresses these. Obstacle number 1, Shakespeare is not Family Guy. It's one thing for students to use their homegrown argumentation skills in a schoolyard debate with their friends about the merits or demerits of Family Guy and Beyonce, or about whether the Chicago Bulls can defeat the Miami Heat in the NBA playoffs if they get Derrick Rose back, which, by the way, is becoming less and less likely, or about which platform shoes or other clothing styles are the coolest. It's one thing to enter into debates about those topics. It's quite another thing to transfer those homegrown skills of debate into a classroom debate about competing interpretations of Macbeth, or the implications of urbanization or automation, or the present state of the economy, American economy. Many of our students, after all, won't need to be persuaded to care about Beyonce or the Chicago Bulls, but it's often not at all obvious to those students how Shakespeare or the sociology of cities figure to matter in their lives. For this reason, instead of plunging students immediately into academic debates about Shakespeare or sociology, it's a good idea to have them first debate topics they care about, and then gradually, when they've had some time to get comfortable with the practices of argumentation in our classrooms, transition from those debates, stuff they care about, over to debates about stuff we care about, or our teaching. George Hillocks and his students call this tactic, they call this tactic of starting with student debates, things they care about, gateway activities, introducing students into academic practices by first modeling those practices on topics students are already interested in or already can see the point of. In devising such gateway activities, I would think it's an advantage to be teaching the social sciences, since virtually any subject your students care about can be viewed through a sociological or a historical lens. For example, take the example I've used, a debate about what they like or don't like about Family Guy can be gradually turned into a debate about how parents and children are represented in that program and in the American popular media more generally, with supplementary readings and other materials that move in that latter direction. Similarly, student debates on cars or sports teams or clothing fashions can be ratcheted up into higher level intellectual debates on the social and cultural meanings of our national enthusiasm for these things. That's the first obstacle, the kind of subject matter that we want students to debate about. Second obstacle, making debate effective with students. Number 2, ArgueSpeak is a foreign language. And of course, that is the big challenge, how to move students from debates about cars and other things they care about to the sociological meanings or the social science implications of car culture and other topics we are teaching. It seems obvious to students that cars are important, but it doesn't seem at all obvious why intellectualizing about cars is all that important, or that such intellectualizing will help them in their lives. On the contrary, to many students, using phrases like social and cultural meanings, using the lingo, of the social sciences might well get them ostracized as snobs and nerds by their friends. So inducing students to seriously try out the highbrow language in which intellectual debate is conducted, language I think presenters who preceded me handle very articulately and very impressively. Getting students to seriously try out that high-level language is an obstacle to getting them to helping them transfer their playground argument skills to their academic work. Public sphere argument is conducted in a special language that most students aren't familiar with and may not see the point of learning to speak and write. This public sphere, this public or academic language is what in the title of this talk and elsewhere I call argue speak. And it's actually not just a language, of course, but a whole way of thinking that demands control of rigorous logic, evidence, and elaborate conventions. I've been talking argue speak here in this talk, as you can probably tell, and we will all speak a version of it in the Q&A afterwards, I would wager. Argue speak is not just the language of academia and academic research. It's not narrowly academic, not particularly academic at all, actually. It's also the language of opinion journalism, the newspaper op-ed pages, and the TV talking heads on CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News. It's the language of the policy analysts and the opinion shapers of the advertising and corporate elite. It's essentially the power discourse of our culture that educational writers like Lisa Delpit and others have argued, and quite rightly in my view, our students badly need to learn. And the more at risk or disadvantaged the students are, the more they need to learn argue speak, to exercise power in our culture. The problem, though, as we all know, is that there's a huge gap between the formally correct language of argue speak and the so-called home languages of kids and adolescents. And that gap is often just as wide for middle-class white students from the suburbs as it is for inner-city Black and Hispanic students. I stumbled on this fact in an embarrassing way a few years ago when I learned the hard way that I couldn't necessarily tell by reading their writing which of my students were non-native English speakers. I had one student who, on the basis of her writing and her ethnic appearance, I assumed was a non-native English speaker. And I said as much when we had an office conference. I had an office conference with her. I said, well, I assume English is not your first language, right? And she became justifiably indignant, and she shot back, what are you talking about, Dr. Graff? I grew up in Skokie. Well, very embarrassing. I realized as I quickly apologized to her that she did have a second language problem, all right, but the second language she was struggling with was not English, but argue speak, or academic intellectual English. Not an unusual problem. One conclusion this and other experiences led me to is that since argue speak is virtually a foreign language, it makes sense to teach it as a foreign language. It is, after all, almost as unfamiliar and exotic to most American students as French or Urdu. And just as we would teach French or Urdu by being explicit about their forms, conjugate these verbs and so forth, noun declensions, we should be equally explicit about how to use argue speak. We certainly can't assume that our students will pick up argue speak by osmosis from reading examples of it or listening to teachers talk it at them. Though students do need to see models of what argue speak looks like if we expect them to produce it themselves. This is why I think the Common Core Standards shift of emphasis from fictional to informational text is a good thing. Though provoked a lot of debate, a lot of humanities teachers aren't so sure. My own major way of being explicit about argue speak, teaching it, is represented in the argument templates that Kathy Birkenstein and I feature in They Say, I Say. Templates that claim to represent the moves, that's the subtitle of our book, the moves that matter in academic writing. Templates that claim to represent the moves students need to learn to make to enter debates about ideas. Our premise is that participants in such public sphere debates recycle a common set of moves that are so widely used that they can be represented in fill-in-the-blank forms that students can use right away to pick up the foreign academic language that they don't already possess. Can we see, we'll be addressing some of these in our breakout this afternoon, but these are some of the templates that are central to the book. Number one is maybe the simplest kind and one that is perhaps easiest for students to be able to do right away. Disagree. Although it is often said blank, or as writer so-and-so says, whom we're reading this week, as writer so-and-so argues, blank, but I argue, blank. Disagreement, though, and direct confrontation isn't the only move in town. We also try to make a place for agreeing, but with the proviso that if you want to agree in a piece of writing with something somebody has said, you need to generate some difference, some contrast between yourself and that other person in order to justify what, otherwise why are you writing at all? We call this agreement with a difference. X argues and I agree because. This can be very useful for students who have a hard time figuring out how they can possibly add to a discussion. One can say, well, something that happened, I agree with what this writer is arguing because something that happened to me illustrates that point, and then the student can find a space to make his own intervention. As I say, the workshop with Kathy Birkenstein and me this afternoon will discuss strategies for teaching with this template. Number 5 is a useful one too. It suggests that it's not always either or choice between two positions. One can call it the mixed feelings or I'm of two minds template. X argues blank and I have mixed feelings about it. On the one hand, I agree, I see the point, but on the other hand, I worry that blank and so forth. Can we go? Number 10 is one that we focus on particularly, the planting a naysayer in our text, we call it. We have a chapter with that title. Of course, it might be objected that, and I concede that the objection might have a point, might be true up to a point. Nevertheless, yet I would still maintain that blank, a move that students probably just aren't going to make on their own. It would never occur to, never even imagine that they should make it or would want to make it. But once they're asked to make it, they can do surprisingly well, and you'd be amazed how much it enlivens the text. It injects a counter voice or a second voice into what otherwise is a monologue. One of the benefits of giving templates like these to students is that those who use them in their writing will start noticing them in their reading. A good classroom game that we like to play in this respect is to ask students to spot the they say in the text. Not the argument the author is making, but the argument that the author, whom or what the author is making his or her argument against. In other words, what motivates, again, the author to make that argument in the first place. Another tactic we like is to take any text at random and ask students to play what we call a game of templatize this. Take a text, you can pretty much do it with the materials in your packet for this conference. Bracket the content for the moment and isolate the rhetorical moves, the forms, which pass under our radar, but which are so important for enabling us to produce college-ready prose, or prose that looks like like argue-speak. If you could flip back, Les, to the Common Core standards slide. you could look at go back to the passage in Appendix A and templatize it. That is, forget for the moment what it's saying, and look at the forms, the setup moves. The blank put particular emphasis on blank, or on blank's ability to blank. As this blank is critical to blank, Professor Blank writes that blank is fundamental to blank. I mean, this may sound a little silly, or it's a little empty, an empty skill set, one of the critics of the Common Core Standards calls it. But in fact, being able to do this gives you a kind of internalized grid of the shape of argumentative writing and thinking. And we find that helping students to, giving students these kinds of formulas and phrases produces, first of all, they say, well, wow, I never even used these phrases, I didn't know them. You know, again, argue-speak is a foreign language, can really transform a text, although the student still has to think. You know, they don't think for the student. The blank is largely a blank, X contends. He claims that because blank is not blank, only blank. And you can see that you're laying bare the sort of logical and rhetorical moves that writers make. And I think at some level we all internalize these moves ourselves when we do our own writing, our own speaking. But students are not going to internalize them unless we foreground them, call attention to them. The third obstacle to helping students enter into academic intellectual debates, I call figuring us out. There's a third obstacle to drawing students into the academic and public argument culture, and it may, in the long run, be the most formidable one of all, and that obstacle is us. And I'm not engaging in teacher bashing here. I mean us collectively, not individually. Part of the problem we have, and I think one thing that makes things difficult for us in teaching, is that we're too much led to think of teaching as a solo enterprise, my course, my classroom, instead of as a team effort that would make us more transparent and identifiable as a group. I mean, think about it. If you walk past a playing field, you see football players, or you go to an office, you see accountants. They have a high identification value. You know, oh, those are football players. We know what they do. Or those are accountants. Yeah, we know what they're for. You can identify them as a group. I don't think the term like a teacher or social science teacher has anywhere near the same transparency. The only way you can figure out what a teacher does is go show up in the course and figure out what that teacher wants, right? And then the next teacher. You can't figure it, or intellectual, or a member of an educated culture. It seems to me that to make an impact on students and to advance the cause of making arguments central in the curriculum, it would make it a lot easier if when students came to a class, they say, oh yeah, or classrooms are about debating, they're about arguing, they're about entering into intellectual discussions in which we agree and disagree. It seems that one of the obstacles here, though, is, and this goes back to my Aaron anecdote at the beginning, we've programmed students and their parents for generations now, if not for centuries, to believe that education isn't about entering into debates about ideas, isn't about argue-speak, but is rather about knowing a lot of stuff that you memorize and give back on an exam or on a standardized test. Well, I think it's going to be difficult to deprogram students from that information-oriented picture of education as long as argument and debate crop up only in an occasional course or two. In other words, curricular debate is going to have a problem transforming students' work if it is not really curricular rather than just occasional and intermittent. And to become truly a curricular presence, debate needs to be a project of the entire teaching staff, or at least a critical mass of the teachers. Something that's reinforced across every subject rather than something students get a taste of in their morning class and then forget about once they get to their courses in the afternoon. I think that argument and debate are the best candidates to provide students with a consistency of experience from course to course and teacher to teacher that will ultimately help them to figure us out, to make us, if not as transparent and identifiable as football players and accountants, then at least something that moves in that direction. Students need to see us not as a set of isolated individuals, but as a coherent collectivity. When you don't get such consistency, and I think is too often the case now, and this is, I think colleges are worse than high schools and elementary schools in this respect, but I think we all need to work on this problem. When there's no consistency from course to course, or nothing that carries over from subject to subject, students pretty much have to they have to start over from scratch. Whenever they get a new teacher, they have to figure out, well, all right, this is Graff, what does he want? Then they go to the next teacher, what does she want? And sometimes there's even conflicts or contradictions between what we want, and they can't build cumulatively. They can't build cumulatively and incremental set of skills. It's difficult to create this kind of consistency and continuity when we teach in separate classrooms, even with plenty of lesson plans and faculty meetings that help to get us on the same page. I think that one thing we could do to build more commonality and consistency across our courses would be to have school-wide events that address controversial issues that students be encouraged to debate between themselves and with us. One model of a school in which this was done, a successful school, is Deborah Meyer's Central Park East schools, now legendary, in Harlem, New York, which are described in Deborah Meyer's book, The Power of Their Ideas. Meyer describes a school where she and other teachers debated constantly in front of the students in a way that would draw students into the debates. It's not easy to replicate Meyer's conditions and transform a whole school that way, but one step that would go in that direction would be for schools to stage all school debates in their assembly halls that would create a common culture of debate in the school. The kind of common culture that now tends to be created only by football and basketball games, right? Or maybe dances or concerts. It might seem utopian, but it's intriguing to imagine a whole student body excited by a common academic debate the way the student body now gets excited when one of its sports teams makes the playoffs. Such all-school debates do actually break out, it's curious to note. I mean, if you think this is a fantasy, something like this actually does happen whenever a major crisis or disaster hits the nation. One educational writer, John Austin, has pointed out the curious fact that disasters and crises periodically create something like a common national curriculum in this country. Think back about such things as the O.J. Simpson trial in the 90s, the September 11th terrorist attacks, the Columbine and Sandy Hook shootings. These events become so big and prominent nationally or internationally, largely through cable TV, 24/7 cable TV on the web, that they are taken up by schools as teachable moments that get students and teachers talking to one another across different subjects and courses. But then, alas, or sadly, once the crisis fades away, we crawl back to the privacy of our separate classrooms to wait until the next crisis again creates a temporary curricular community, or a kind of national curriculum. Well, instead of waiting in this way, schools might start initiating all school debates on controversial public issues right now. Something like this actually occurred in Chicago in 1992 when Spike Lee's film Malcolm X appeared, and one enterprising Chicago high school, realizing that many of its students were skipping school anyway in order to see Spike Lee's film, decided to organize a discussion in the school auditorium on the issues raised by the film about the state of race relations in America and what might be done about them. Today, the national debates over gun control in the wake of school and other shootings would be an obvious topic for an all-school debate, which again could be student-led or strong student participation. Another topic that kind of cries out for an all-school debate would be the current, it's interesting that kind of coming to a head today, March 1st, sequestration, the big budget cuts. Is that good or bad? Current debates about economic policy, the case to be made for lower taxes and smaller government, or for higher taxes and more government spending. Big debate that the country is having, and as I say, it kind of cries out for to be dramatized in a school event, instead of simply being marginalized in one course or another. Such all-school debates, moreover, would figure not just to get students excited about intellectual issues, while training them to discuss such issues more commonly, while training them in argue-speak. Such debates would function as professional development activities for teachers, kind of do the professional development while you're teaching, as teachers would learn from one another in such collective events how to use debate as a pedagogical tool, at least one would hope so. I'll end this talk as I began with another story about our 10-year-old son, Aaron. One day when Aaron was just 3 and only just beginning to talk, he threw his food off his high chair all over the floor. Before his parents could rise up and start scolding him, however, Aaron preempted us by saying, "Good boy, good boy." Kathy and I realized that Aaron was already learning to make arguments in anticipation of counter-arguments. Figure 2 arguments, if you will. We realized that children learn to argue even as they're learning to talk. And again, how else can they make their way in the world? That's not to say that Aaron's arguments were good arguments. As we quickly pointed out to him, just repetitively saying "good boy" doesn't necessarily make you a good boy, but that's another matter. The point is that all kids develop this latent argument skill virtually out of the cradle. And we educators are missing a huge opportunity if we don't take advantage of it. Thank you very much. Well, now let's hear some argue speak. Yes.
Okay, so you mentioned there's like the playground debate of D Rose versus LeBron, and then you say we got to do that in the classroom to scaffold up to respect, right? Well, it seems like we got step 1 and step 3, but where's step 2? What would you do as a step 2, kind of like getting them from D Rose and LeBron? There's got to be another step in the middle to get yourself up to respect. Like, what would you do to engage the students in that?
Yeah. Good, I think very good question, kind of key question. How do you move from D Rose versus LeBron to the state of the economy, or what to do about gun control and so forth? Well, my assumption is that the language of the debate is very important. And I want to say it's more important than the content, because the content is always important. But I mean, if you can stage the debate over, okay, who's the best player, D Rose or LeBron? In that debate, if students are using argue-speak, such as if that debate enables them to say things like, well, of course, I'm defending LeBron, but I understand that you will probably object that D Rose did blah, 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 and so forth. Or LeBron has the advantage. LeBron has the advantage, after all, of having Dwayne Wade. This is kind of basketball insider, sorry. But, you know, if D Rose had a Dwayne Wade, he'd be as good as LeBron or better. If students learn to make those moves and use the language, and learn the language in which you make those moves, as I understand it, you're arguing X, and you would object to what I'm saying, that blah, blah, blah. That language should be transferable. And in fact, it might even make it more, provide an inducement for them to actually take on subjects that aren't basketball. So, yeah.
So step one is finding something they're interested in. Step two is laying the foundation of the templates. And then maybe step three, we can get them to, maybe that might be 8 steps later actually, but getting them to make that for the state economy.
Yeah, I mean, I have somewhat autobiographical reasons for making this argument, because that's kind of the way it happened for me. My book, Clueless in Academe, I described myself. I was kind of an anti-intellectual kid, anti-school. I wasn't particularly good at school. I didn't care about it very much. I cared about sports, playing and watching. But I learned to argue through sports culture and the playground, the playing field. And I learned to argue about other things, movies and so forth. So that when I finally got to college and, you know, there was an inducement to get serious about academics, I found that I could, and I somehow figured out that, yeah, you know, if you can make an argument, you're going to do pretty well in college. And I found that these skills of argumentation and this language of argumentation that I'd learned in sport, and I read sports magazines, a lot of sports reportage and so forth, so, and I could get the language out of that, and I found that that language transferred very readily to academia. And you know, it's dangerous to just generalize your own experience like that, but our experience with the book, They Say, I Say, I think has given us some confidence in this position that if you teach students the argument moves, that's why I say it's useful for pedagogical purpose to bracket the content and look at the forms, which almost always pass under the radar. You know? Even though when we teach French, we focus on the forms, because you have to. If we start seeing intellectual discourse as a foreign language and start teaching it that way, no, look, learn to say this. I mean, we tell this to our own students, say, no, use these phrases on the one hand, on the other hand. Or you will object at this point that blank, but. And the feedback we get from students is, wow, you know, nobody ever told us to do this. I wouldn't use this language. There's a kind of behavior, sneaky behavior modification element in teaching students a new language. Not that it's going to transform them overnight into great students or eggheads or intellectuals, but it helps. It helps a lot. And once students learn to sound like advanced arguers, then they can begin to see the power of that kind of discourse. So I guess, yeah, that would be my suggestion, that foreground the language. And when Kathy and I started out this project, my thought was, well, students will never accept this, you know, what could be more boring than learning argue speak? But it hasn't really, to us, turned out that way. You know, it turns out to be kind of fascinating. Because I think students can sense that there's a power language out there, as Lisa Delpit and others argue, that will help them if they can control it. Yeah.
One of the practical issues with this is, I did a debate with the Great Depression, and just to throw something out there, the issue that, well, women tend to spend more even if they don't need something. And I couldn't get them to be quiet. They didn't want to listen to each other.
Yeah.
They want to make their point, and the idea of just listening to what somebody else has to say is a major issue with debate. They don't like, some people feel that they have everything in handle. The tennis ball, you can't talk until this one gets the ball, this sort of thing. It just went up to that. You know, I just have to just listen to them, just have at it.
Yeah, you know, I don't think you're the first teacher to notice that encouraging students to debate suddenly livens up the classroom, more than livens up the classroom. Sometimes it's even frightening, you know, the students are going at each other so intensely. And it can, And there can be problems. Students will sometimes confuse insults with arguments, right? Ah, that's stupid, or will shout each other down, or the boys with louder voices will. So, and one has to anticipate those problems. One also has to anticipate the problem of, 10 students get very agitated by the debate, but the other 10 or 15 just sit there, right, and don't jump in or aren't as predisposed. So one has to think ahead and figure out activities that will get all of the students involved. I can build that into one's assignments, but I think one can do that. But yeah, it's a source of classroom excitement generally. Yes.
One of the things that we're
Could you make sure you speak up loudly? They can't hear in the back. If you're
One of the
asking a
things we're
question.
struggling with at our school is academic discourse. That's what we're calling. I like this better because I think it's a little more kid-friendly. But what we're doing in all of our classes, and we're doing this very explicitly, is we're providing stems for our students in our classes to begin discussions. And then we do one of a couple of different things. We have a strategy where the kids turn and talk to one another. And then we have a strategy where kids are sitting in a pot of maybe 4, and they run around the table, and in order to advance the argument, they cannot repeat an argument. They can agree or disagree, they can explain why, but they cannot repeat something they've heard. They've got to build upon it. It's arduous, it's sometimes frustrating, it's not chaotic. It can be a little inconsistent, but we're seeing growth. And I think what's true is it's allowing students in my classroom, I have 4th graders, I have students in my classroom who never say anything, but in these groups, they now have a voice. And it's been hard because you got to pull it out. It's, somewhere those little voice boxes are there, but it's hard. It's really, that's our problem of practice in our school. So on a school-wide basis, we're working on this, and as teachers, we're working on putting together rubrics for speaking and listening. And we've had some days that have been chaotic, just in our own meetings. But it seems to be going somewhere, which is the good news. So you have to put up with some of the chaos to get to where we want to go, I think.
How often do you do it?
Every single day. Every single day.
And how is that incorporated?
Well, part of it is, I do it in my reading classes, and sometimes it's only for a few minutes. I'll say, for the next 5 minutes, we're going to share out. And I also, in my classroom, I make sure that if they're working in a group of 4, every person has a job at the table. So if they all know that they have a job and they have to listen to the arguments, they're all kind of thinking about it. But it takes a lot of preparation. I'm not kidding. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of preparation. It's a lot of thinking about it. I talk to the other people in my 4th grade team constantly about it. We're always checking in. Sometimes we're pulling our hair out. But I just think that's where, if we keep at it, by the time they get up to the junior high, and I have junior high teachers, you can tell you, I think it allows those kids who never say a thing to realize I do have a voice, I have something important to say, and I have a platform from which to speak. I'm hoping.
And because beyond that, so in junior high, I teach 6 classes a day, 32 kids per class for 45 minutes. So it's difficult for me. So it's not every day that I break them into small groups, but the culture in the classroom is that element. I've almost gotten rid of raising your hand. So you need to kind of call on people because the same 5 people raise their hand all the time. But we've actually in junior high we're continually working on this rubric, but kind of this rubric to that. And what I don't use it to grade the kids, I use it to keep track of kind of who's talking. So at the end of every class, sometimes I have a spreadsheet and I can go, yeah, okay, so tomorrow I need to get to those 5 people to make sure they're bringing in that element. But again, this is like bang in our heads, and some days we're ready to just shoot the word discourse out the window, but we're starting to see this element of, and I think it's been embedded in school, but as we get it more formalized, we see the benefits of that, and then we're trying to embed it across the board in ours. But see the gray hair?
I suspect that.
5 minutes, 5 minutes.
Yeah, I suspect that this making debate and argument central will become easier as kids, when they come to school, begin to see, well, that's what school is all about. I mean, that seems to me normalizing debate is a challenge because, as I said in my talk, that hasn't been what school is all about for kids. It's not the expectation that when you come to school, you're going to enter a debate culture. On the contrary, the expectation is that you're not going to do that. And so I think the more debate becomes normalized across subjects in classrooms, it will become, a lot of the work is to overcoming the expectation on the student's part that debate is weird, or it's not education, it's something else. That's why maybe explaining fully what, in this school, where we believe we're committed to principles that debate is a strong educational tool. You're going to be exposed. You're not going to be expected you're going to be expected not just to learn things, but to be able to make use of the information you learn to enter into debates, because that's really what drives the culture, policy debate, and so forth. So these are very interesting stories, though, of what has to happen. I also think it's an advantage if we flag the word argument, over something like academic discourse. When you say academic discourse, well, what's that? It's not a term that students are used to using, to say the least. It sounds forbidding, it may sound boring to some students, whereas you say argument, even if they don't like it all that much, and some students don't, they know what it is. I think it's a great advantage in teaching where your central terms are terms that already have some prior familiarity to the students with. These are wonderful stories. I understand we have time only for maybe one more comment or question.
We're going into break time, so we're going to have to close the session to respect the break time.
Thank you very much.
Before you go to break, everyone's going to the topic. They say I say book at the end of the day. We still have to evaluate to get that. Another thing too is the Freedom Bus. We do have that on site. So during your lunch break, you can definitely see the Freedom Bus. It's in the south parking lot. So feel free to take a look at it. It's about 5 or 10 minutes. Okay, break time.